Good morning, second graders. Thank you for tuning in today. Today is Tuesday, April 21st, and I'm so glad that you are here today. I want to give a special happy birthday message to Anthony. It was his birthday on Saturday. Anthony, I hope you had a great weekend. Happy 8th birthday. And I know the sun was shining on Saturday, so I bet it was shining just for you. Something I want to show all of you is this packet that was in your folder. It is called My 2020 COVID-19 Time Capsule. And some of you might be wondering when we're going to do this. And I wanted to let you know that some of you have asked for some extra work to do, and I think that's great. So after you complete your other assignments, if you want to complete the activities in this time capsule, you can do that. A time capsule is something that you can come back to later on, many years later, and reflect back on what was happening in your life at that time. So it is not anything that you're required to do. You don't have to ever show this work to me. This is just something extra you can do if you would like to have a time capsule to remember this time in your life. So I just wanted to make that clear to you. And I hope you're all doing well today. And yesterday, we did some pre-reading activities for the Lions at Lunchtime book. And I know you're excited to start reading that book together. And I have to apologize that you don't actually have this book in your hands yet. It was our intent that each second grader would be able to actually hold the book and follow along with the pages. But you know what? Sometimes in life, things don't go the way we expect them to go. And so it really can be a life lesson for us when things don't go the way we think they should. We had ordered this book like 2.5 weeks ago and thought you'd have it by now, but there were some problems with shipping. So if you don't have it yet, that is why. If you do have it, go get it. But I'm hoping to get all of those books to you in the next day or two when they come. So one thing, though, that you need to know is there's different kinds of comprehension. I've talked to you before about reading comprehension, where you read a book, and comprehending is how well you remember and understand what you read. But there's also listening comprehension, and that is a skill as well. So when I read this to you today, you can follow along. I'll have the camera on the book, but you are building your listening comprehension even when you don't have the book in your hands and you're listening to me read it. So there's still some reading skills being gained there. So it's an important time. So be sure to follow along as best as you can, and we will begin this book. Here we go. We are ready to begin reading Lions at Lunchtime by Mary Pope Osborne. We did all of our pre-reading activities yesterday, so let's dive right in. Magic Treehouse number 11, Lions at Lunchtime by Mary Pope Osborne, illustrated by Sal Murdaka. And here's our table of contents. Today we will read Chapter 1, Before Lunch, and Chapter 2, Jump, Beasts, Jump. Do you know what kind of animal that is? You will find out in this chapter. Chapter 1, Before Lunch. Jack and Annie were walking home from the grocery store. Jack's pack was heavy. It held a big jar of peanut butter and a loaf of bread. "Are you going to have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich?" said Annie. "Or a peanut butter and honey sandwich?" Jack started to answer, but stopped. "Oh, man," he whispered. "What is it?" said Annie. "Look at that," said Jack. He pointed to the edge of the Frog Creek woods. In the shadow stood a small, delicate animal. It looked like a tiny deer. "It's a sign," whispered Annie. "Remember when we saw the rabbit? He was a sign of the Wild West." The deer-like creature leaped into the woods. Jack and Annie didn't stop to think. They followed as fast as they could. Jack's heavy pack thumped against his back as he ran. Finally, they stopped and looked around. "Where did she go?" he said. I don't see her, said Annie. Oh, wow, said Annie. She pointed up. There was the magic treehouse. It was shining in the noon sun at the top of the tallest tree in the woods. Its rope ladder swayed in the shadows below. Where's Morgan? Said Annie. Morgan Le Fay wasn't waving at them from the window. She wasn't even at the window. Now, boys and girls, I've talked to you before about how good readers stop and ask questions as they read. And I'm guessing that right here you have a question in your mind. You are probably asking yourself, who is Morgan Le Fay? So I want to give you some background on that. Since this is book number 11 and we skipped from number 1 to 11, there's a little bit of information that the reader of those other books in between would have gained. And here is what you need to know. Morgan Le Fay is actually the owner of the treehouse. And she's a magical librarian who guides them on missions. And she actually can morph into animals or into different people. In fact, if you think back to book number 1, she had morphed into the pteranodon that saved Jack and Annie during that story. So, Morgan Le Fay wasn't waving at them from the window. She wasn't even at the window. I don't know. Let's go up, said Jack. They climbed the ladder and went into the treehouse. Sunlight streamed through the window. It lit a stack of books and 2 scrolls in the corner. The ancient scrolls held the answers to riddles Jack and Annie had solved earlier. Jack took off his heavy pack. Did Morgan leave us a 3rd riddle? Said Annie. Now you're probably wondering about these riddles, 2nd grade. Starting in book 9, Morgan Le Fay started assigning riddles to Jack and Annie. And if they can solve 4 riddles, they can become master librarians. So in book 9 and 10, they solved a riddle. Now this is book 11. So that is why Annie asks, did Morgan leave us a 3rd riddle? Looking for someone? Said a soft voice. Jack and Annie whirled around. Morgan, said Annie. Oh, there's a picture of Morgan. Morgan Le Fay had appeared out of nowhere. She looked ancient and lovely in the bright light. Do you still want to become master librarians? She asked Jack and Annie. So you can help me in my work? Yes, they said together. Wonderful, Morgan said. Then she reached into her robe and pulled out a scroll. You've solved 2 riddles so far, she said. Here is your 3rd. She handed the scroll to Annie. You can see Annie holding a scroll. That's a rolled up piece of paper with important writing on it. And for your research, she pulled out a book from her robe and handed it to Jack. The book's cover said, The Plains of Africa. Africa, said Jack. Oh man, I've always wanted to go there. Do you remember where Africa is on the map I showed you yesterday? He opened the book. He and Annie stared at a picture. It showed hordes of zebras, tall giraffes, big animals with horns, and tiny deer-like creatures. Hey, that's the animal that led us here, said Annie. A Thompson's gazelle, I believe, Morgan said. So that's the name of the animal you saw at the beginning of the book, a Thompson's gazelle. Where are the lions, said Jack. You'll find out, said Morgan. Maybe we need to plan this trip, said Jack. Morgan smiled. No, go ahead. Make your wish now. Annie pointed at the picture. I wish we could go there, she said. Be careful, said Morgan. Just keep an eye out. For what? Said Jack. The lions, of course, she said. Wait, said Jack. Too late. The wind had started to blow. The treehouse had started to spin. Jack squeezed his eyes shut. The treehouse spun faster and faster. Then everything was still. Absolutely still. And here is the beginning of chapter 2. It is called Jump, beasts, jump. Bright light flooded the treehouse. A rustling sound came from outside the window. Annie peeked out and laughed. "Hey there," she said. Jack looked out too. A giraffe was eating leaves off the tree. It had a sweet, goofy face. Jack peered at the world beyond the giraffe. He couldn't believe his eyes. He saw a huge grassy plain, a wide river, and tons of birds and animals. More than he had ever imagined in one place. Giraffes and zebras were on the side of the river where Jack and Annie were. Thompson's gazelles and the bighorn animals were on the other side. "Where are the lions?" said Jack. "I don't know," said Annie. "Do you think it's always this crowded?" "Let's find out," said Jack. He picked up the book on Africa and looked at the picture of the animals. He read aloud. Now remember, these words in bold print always give facts. "Every year in late spring, thousands of zebras and gazelles and millions of wildebeests migrate from the dry plains of Tanzania to Kenya." "What's migrate mean?" said Annie. Jack pushed his glasses into place. "It means they go someplace else for part of the year, like birds going south for the winter." "Oh, right," said Annie. Jack turned the page to read more. "Before they are safe in Kenya, the animals must first cross the Mara River. Zebras go first, then the wildebeests. The tiny gazelles swim last." "Oh," said Annie in a sad voice. "What's wrong?" said Jack. "Poor beasts." She looked out the window. "They seem afraid." On the far side of the river, the horned animals were standing at the edge of the steep bank of the river. They stared down nervously at the rushing water. "Jump, beasts, jump!" Annie shouted. "Don't be silly, they can't hear you," said Jack. He studied the broad plain. "I wonder where the lions are," he said. "I don't know, but I have to go," said Annie. "Go where?" said Jack. "To the river to help them," she said. "Help who?" said Jack. "Those wild beasts on the other side," said Annie. "I have to help them migrate." "Are you nuts?" said Jack. Annie handed Jack the scroll and started out of the treehouse. "Wait a second," said Jack. "We haven't even read Morgan's riddle yet." Annie stopped on the ladder. "Read it now," she said. Jack unrolled the ancient scroll and read aloud. "I'm the color of gold, and as sweet as can be. But beware of the danger that's all around me. What am I?" Does it make you wonder? It makes me wonder what the riddle answer is. Annie started down again. "Annie! We'll look for the answer in a minute," said Annie. "What are you doing?" Jack called. But there was no stopping her. Jack watched as she hopped off the ladder. Then she started to walk through the tall grass between the zebras and giraffes. "I don't believe her," he said to himself. He quickly put the Africa book into his pack. He started down the ladder. When he stepped onto the ground, he looked around carefully. The giraffes were eating the tree leaves. The zebras were grazing in the grass. Tons of birds flapped overhead. "This is okay," he thought. He just had one little question. Where are the lions? Maybe we'll find out in the next chapter. Now remember, second grade, if you do have this book, I asked you to promise not to read ahead. So if you look on your matrix, it tells you to do pages 3 and 4 in your Lions at Lunchtime packet. I just want to go over the questions with you, and I'd like you to complete this today. Now you might have to go back in my video to answer some of these. Number 1. Now this is about chapter 1. What did Jack and Annie see in the woods? And if you're not sure how to spell it, you could go back to my reading and even find it on the page and pause it so you spell it correctly. Number 2, who was waiting for them when they got to the treehouse? Number 3, Morgan asked Jack and Annie if they still wanted to become Master Blank. Again, you can look back and spell it correctly if you can find the right page in the book on my video. Number 4, what was the book that Morgan gave Jack about? Number 5, what does Morgan warn Jack and Annie to keep an eye out for? Okay, and those are pretty basic questions, but in order for you to do some higher thinking, we have some critical thinking questions for you. Number 6, what are some things that you think Jack and Annie might see in Africa? Number 7, imagine that you are Jack and Annie. Explain how you would feel as the treehouse was spinning away. Now remember, when you explain feelings, you don't just use one word. You can use several words that would describe how you feel, and you write it in a complete sentence. And you can add why you think you would feel that way. After you do page 3, you are to do page 4. Now this is about chapter 2. So if you're going back in my video, find the pages in chapter 2. Number 1, what was the first kind of animal that Jack and Annie saw in Africa? Number 2, use details from the text to describe what Africa looked like to Jack and Annie when they first arrived. Number 3, tell one fact that Jack and Annie learned from their book about Africa. Number 4, why does Annie feel bad for the beasts? And just one critical thinking question at the bottom. Jack and Annie's riddle says, I'm the color of gold and as sweet as can be. But beware of the danger that's all around me. What am I? Use the text and what you know to make an inference about what the clue means. And remember, an inference is when you put some clues together and try to draw a conclusion. Now, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong on this. Just try to put the clues together. And then I have created a seesaw activity where you can go ahead and take a picture of your work and send it to me. I would like to see pages 3 and 4. Okay, let's correct our math from yesterday. We'll go through this quickly. You had to do numbers 1 through 6. You should have put survey for number 1, and then key, and then picture graph. Remember this graph we made yesterday? There are your answers for 4, 5, and 6. And today, if you look on your matrix, it tells you that you are going to finish the Check My Progress page by doing the backside, numbers 7 through 12. So let's go through that. You're going to use this tally chart to make a picture graph. Then you're going to use the data from the graph to answer these 2 questions. How many more votes did bike get than baseball? Number 9, how many people like jump ropes and inline skates? So remember, and is a key word. Tells you to add. Here's your brain builders. How many more people voted for bike and jump rope all together than voted for baseball and inline skates all together? So I'm going to give you a hint. You will have to add up bike and jump rope first. Then you'll have to add up baseball and inline skates. Then you'll have 2 numbers. Then it says how many more. Remember, ding, 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 subtract. So then you will have to subtract those 2 numbers you made here to find the answer. So think about that. Do your best. If you're stuck, you could ask someone in your family for help. Number 11, if 3 more people vote for jump rope and 1 more person votes for baseball, which toy is the favorite? So you could go right up there and draw those in and try that out. And then you have 1 test practice question. 2 students did not vote. If those 2 students all voted for inline skates, which toy would have the most votes? Okay, so see if you can get that all completed. That's all you have to do for today. and I will be back with you tomorrow. Have a wonderful Tuesday. Miss you much.